Hello friends, it's Evelyn here. Welcome back to the channel on a rather chilly day. I hope you're all well and thank you so much for your continued love and support here on the Evelyn Adore channel. If you haven't done so yet, please hit that all important subscribe button down below and come and follow me on Instagram. This week, because it's been so cold, I've actually ended up reverting to my winter modus operandi, which is basically a sofa surfing seal. And two of my ultimate favourite films for said sofa surfing happen to be 1994's Stargate and 1999's The Mummy. So you might be seeing a little theme emerging here, and that is my favourite ancient civilization, which is, you guessed it, the ancient Egyptians. I have been obsessed with ancient Egypt and its civilization since I cannot remember when. We had an ancient Egypt day in primary school, and of course I dressed up as Tutankhamun. Stripes, gorgeous jewel colours, kohl eyeliner. What's not to love? I also grew up watching a golden era cinema and fell in love with costuming and costume design while watching Liz Taylor's epic Cleopatra. So with that in mind, my friends, let's create something that is lounging appropriate and Egyptian inspired this week. Let's get creating. Back in ancient Egyptian times, nudity was not at all taboo, so the beaded negligees that you see Anck-su-namun wear in the mummy films are actually pretty accurate. But the Egyptians also wore gowns that did cover their modesty, which can be seen in the hieroglyphs and decorations on various ancient tombs throughout Egypt. And my design today is inspired by those styles and by the catwalk tunic style looks they have inspired over the years, and I'm going to construct it using a Kaftan style garment to create something that's Egyptian inspired but is so good for lounging in. Wonderful. And if lounging around in kaftans is something that delights you too, be sure to check out the kaftan video I created last summer, and there's a card above. To make my Egyptian-inspired kaftan creation, I'm going to cut 2 panels of my fabric, which is today this wonderful soft black scuba crepe. The width of the panels is my wrist to wrist measurement, while the length is my shoulder to floor measurement. So having cut the 2 panels, it's time to create the neckline. To do this, I've folded one of the panels in half lengthways, and I've then used pins firstly to mark half of my desired neckline opening out from the fold along the upper edge, and then down from the upper edge of the fold I've marked my neckline depth. Next, I need to decide on how wide I want my 2 coloured bands to be on the neckline in these 2 gorgeous colours of scuba, a teal and a goldenrod colour, which annoyingly really doesn't come across too well on photos. I've chosen to use a width of 1.5 inches for each colour for a total of 3 inches. Grabbing my pins, I mark the measurement of 3 inches outwards and downwards from the guide pins I've already placed on my panel, then chalking a line between the 2 points like so. I then cut above this line by ½ inch to create a seam allowance. And while I'm measuring along that centre fold, I'm also going to plot where my waistline buttonholes need to be, which will help achieve that cinched in waist effect. I start by plotting my shoulder to waist measurement, marking it with a pin along that centre front fold. I then plot 1/4 of my waist measurement in from this pin, pinning through both sides of the fabric so I can transfer this mark to the left and right sides of the kaftan. This is where the buttonholes will be positioned. Repeat this process on both of your kaftan panels. Next, it's time to cut the neckline bands from the contrasting scuba fabrics. And I've done this lengthwise as this is the direction of least stretch on the fabric to minimise the neckline stretching out. After cutting strips that are as long as my neckline plus a few inches and my chosen width of 3 inches plus seam allowance, I line them up along the neckline to be able to accurately trim the edges, adding seam allowances at the centre front. Then it's time to sew those 2 contrast pieces together. Take your time when joining sharp angled pieces like these and clip into the seam allowances if needed to make the process easier. Then it's time to attach that contrast neckline to the front of my kaftan. Grabbing my back piece and placing it right sides together with the front piece, I then sew the shoulder seams. When sewing these shoulder seams, I also sew the sides together from approximately where my buttonhole placements are, right down to the hem. To create the waist tie for my Egyptian-inspired cozy kaftan, I began by cutting 3-inch wide strips of my black crepe fabric and 2-inch wide strips of my 2 contrasting scuba fabrics. Using a 1/2-inch seam allowance throughout, I then joined the 2 contrasting colours together lengthways to create a striped tie. I then pinned this striped piece right sides together with the black crepe piece, stitching all the way around while leaving a couple of inches open to allow me to be able to turn the tie right side out, then stitching the opening closed. With my ties complete, I can now plot my buttonholes onto both kaftan pieces, plotting half the finished width of the tie to the top of the placed pins and the other half to the bottom of the placed pins like so. Sew those buttonholes and believe it or not, your kaftan is finished. To make my bastet brooch, I began by crafting a little draft of her using white Fimo Soft, which I will then use to create a mould. Grabbing some mould making silicone putty, I mix equal parts of the 2 components together before pushing my clay bastet figure into the putty, leaving it to set to create a mould. This was the first time I've ever created a mould for my Fimo. I usually recreate designs from scratch, but I'm happy to say it was a big success, and here is the resulting mould. Then it was time to fill this new mould with my chosen clay, and I went for Fimo Effect Black Pearl. And when my bastet was baked, she looked like this. And to decorate her and add some detail, I grabbed my acrylic paint pens. To attach the brooch pin, it's time to grab the trusty Mod Podge. And now it's time for the reveal. I am over the moon with my new kaftan. It feels so glamorous, but is so super comfy and effortless to wear. And you may have noticed a few changes from the original design, and that's fine because that's what the design process is all about. I ended up with a higher neckline than the original sketch. Because this was such a simple garment, constructed without darts or any real shaping, a lower neckline could cause the front of the kaftan to sag. I also ended up creating a second tie to use as a headband. But until next week, my friends, it's time for some lounging. Take care, bye!